I think it's not what they want, it's what they're entitled to. And I think the comp plans
Clerk, please note those in attendance.
Will be noted with the exception of Councilmember Hughes.
Thank you, and I will note, I apologize for getting started late. Councilmember Hughes is at a choir concert for kiddos across the street, so I'm sure she'll be joining us soon. I trust you'll note that in the minutes when she arrives. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, jumping into item 2A, minutes of the regular city council meeting on April 25th, 2023. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes. So moved. A motion. Someone want to make a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion.
Abstain.
One abstention. Motion carries. Minutes pass. Item 2B, minutes of the city council work session on April 25th, 2023. I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and the minutes are approved. Item 3, adoption of the agenda. Are there any corrections, movements, additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
A motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an agenda. Item 4, consent agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The consent agenda is adopted. Item 5, visitors and presentations. We have the Law Enforcement Memorial Proclamation. Does anyone have anything to say on that, or should I just jump right in? All right. I have the esteemed honor of reading this proclamation regarding law enforcement both here in White Bear and nationwide. So here goes. Whereas there are approximately 800,000 law enforcement officers serving in communities across the United States, including the dedicated members of the White Bear Lake Police Department. Whereas since the first recorded death in 1786, almost 23,785 law enforcement officers in the United States have made the ultimate sacrifice and been killed in the line of duty. Whereas the names of these dedicated public servants are engraved on the walls of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. Whereas 556 names of fallen heroes are being added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial this spring, including 224 officers killed in 2022 and 332 officers killed in the previous years. Whereas the service and sacrifice of all officers killed in the line of duty will be honored during the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund's 35th Annual Candlelit Light Vigil on the evening of May 13, 2023. Whereas the Candlelight Vigil is part of National Police Week, which will be observed this year from Tuesday, May 9 to Saturday, May 20. Whereas May 15 is designated as Peace Officers Memorial Day in honor of all fallen officers and their families. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the White Bear Lake City Council will observe May 9 through 20, 2023, as Police Week in the city of White Bear Lake, and publicly salutes the service of law enforcement officers in our community and in communities across the nation. And I see that our Chief Swanson is here. I will present this to you and thank you. Yes. All right. Item 6, public hearings. We have nothing scheduled. Item 7, unfinished business. We have nothing scheduled. Item 8, new business, 2502 County Road E planned unit development and rezoning. Mr. Lindahl, I believe you're taking that.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. We begin this item by talking just quickly about the background. The applicant in this case is the company called Element Design Build. The property in question, as you mentioned, is 2502 County Road E. It's most notably known by the surrounding community as the vacant petrol wash station. There are two applications that are part of consideration before the council tonight. The first one is the rezoning of the property to R6 medium density residential, and the second one is a planned unit development application. The concept before the city tonight is 17 total residential units. 14 of those units are in an apartment building, and the other 3 units are in a row house style building. This application went before the Planning Commission at their April meeting and received a 7-0 vote to recommend that the council approve the application. Just giving you some quick background here on the site, again, 2502 County Road E, the southeast corner of County Road E and Bel Air Avenue. The site is nearly 3/4 of an acre, or almost 30,000 square feet. It's been a gas station since at least 1971 based on city records. The existing building that's part of that gas station site was constructed in 1985. It has been vacant since at least 2009 based on the finding of city records that show water service was stopped that 13 years ago. The fuel tanks associated with the fuel station were removed approximately 6 years ago based on city records. The review process, again, before us tonight is their actual rezoning and land and plan unit development applications. But as everyone likely recalls, this application began back in February as a concept plan review. As part of that concept plan review process, it was just an opportunity for the applicant to come before the neighbors, the Planning Commission, and City Council and receive feedback on the application. There was no entitlements or approvals that came out of that concept plan process. But as part of that, again, the first of the 3 meetings was held as a neighborhood meeting back on February 2nd that was hosted by the developer. The invitations to that meeting, again, were distributed by the developer to the surrounding neighborhood and noted the meeting, the neighborhood meeting that they were having that night and the upcoming city meetings at the Planning Commission and City Council levels. At the neighborhood meeting that occurred on the 2nd of February, there were 22 people in attendance, and while there were a few of those people that spoke in support of the application, most of the people present at that meeting voiced concerns and opposition to the project. Then the Planning Commission reviewed a generalized staff report, heard a presentation from staff, and a presentation from the applicant at their February 27th meeting. During that time, there were 8 people that provided public comment to the Planning Commission at that meeting. 3 were in support, generally in support of it, and 5 were generally opposed to the development at that time. The Planning Commission, after discussing the item and hearing from the neighborhood, were generally supportive of the concept plan at that time. Then the information from that neighborhood meeting and the Planning Commission meeting was summed up in another staff report that was presented to the City Council back on March 14th. As part of that meeting, there were 4 people that provided public comment, and all 4 of those people that provided public comment to the council at that time voiced concerns and opposition to the project. Of the council's feedback at that time, 4 were generally supportive. 4 members of the council were generally supportive of that concept plan, and 1 was not. So based on the feedback that came from the public, the Planning Commission, the City Council, and staff during the concept plan review process, the applicant went back and revised their application in the ways that are noted on this screen here, and I'll just summarize those here quickly. So of the density concerns that were raised, the applicant revised their plans to move from what was 18 units in the original design down to 17 units as the proposal is before you tonight. There were concerns about height and the maximum height limit in the R6 zoning district being 35 feet. The original concept plan was at 39 feet, and the applicant did revisions to their plans to bring the apartment building down to just under 31 feet and the townhome building to just about 29 feet. There was also concerns raised and feedback given about parking and the concerns related to that. The standard for multifamily units within White Bear Lake requires a minimum of 2 stalls per unit and at least one of those stalls to be enclosed, and the applicant has revised their concept to meet that standard. The applicant also went back and did a fairly extensive redesign of the outside of the building and the exterior materials that they are proposing to use to create a higher quality design in an attempt to also blend in better with the overall design within White Bear Lake and specifically within the adjacent neighborhood. They've revised their landscaping to increase screening and overall aesthetic appeal of the site. Based on pedestrian concerns, they added a sidewalk along Jansen Avenue for pedestrian safety. They've added an interior bike storage area to allow the residents of the building to have additional storage space for bicycles. And they've submitted a detailed stormwater plan that adds retention, storage, and treatment to meet the city's standards. So with those redesigns, the proposal that's now before the council tonight includes, as I mentioned, 17 units, 14 in an apartment building that is generally located still in the northern half of the building, closer to County Road E and Bel Air. It still includes a ground floor internal parking lot or enclosed parking structure, and 3 ground floor units and a lobby area up close to the corner. Transitioning down to 2 stories either in the parking structure as it moves towards the east along County Road E or the row houses to the south. The second building, as we mentioned already, is a 3-unit row house building that's positioned again in the southwest corner of the site. They've revised these units to move to a tuck-under garage style. So now there's the garages are completely enclosed within the tuck-under level of the garage or of the structure, and provides maneuvering and additional parking space behind those units. And then looking at the parking again for the overall site, it was redesigned to meet the 2 stalls per unit and at least one of those units being enclosed. So with 17 total units, they have a total of 34 total off-street parking stalls, 22 of which are enclosed within either the apartment building or the garages associated with the townhouse. And then there's a 12-stall surface parking lot. So the next series of slides takes a look at the exterior of the building. The applicant has computerly generated the design of the building onto photos of the surrounding area in an attempt to show the size and scale of how the building would fit in on the site. And so here, looking at the corner of County Road E and Bel Air at the site, you can see, again, the redesign here, moving from what was a flat roof and a taller building before to a peaked roof with gables on top. You can also note that the applicant made an effort to redesign the site, and again, to have a more residential character with stone around the entire base of the street-facing sides of the building, and then moving on to a masonry siding in the middle level and shakes in the upper levels. They also attempted to add interest to the building and break up the building with vertical accents, including the wood columned features that break up the individual sections of the building into smaller portions, again, in an attempt to break up a larger building into smaller sections and give it a more residential character, and adding other features like awnings along the lower level to give it a more residential appeal. Just moving around the site now, taking a look at the site now from Bel Air back towards the east, you can see again the apartment building that we looked at in the previous slide on the left-hand side of this slide. Again, the gables broken up along the top of the roof and the pitched roof in an attempt to lower the overall height and aesthetic impact of the site. And then the townhomes that are further to the south are on the right side of this picture that move down to 2.5 stories on that side. Then they've also developed, since the Planning Commission meeting, additional views of the building here from the south east corner of Jansen and the neighboring property to the east, looking back towards the north and the west, to give an idea of what the back of the townhomes will look like in the parking lot area. And the distance shown here from the green space and landscaping and stormwater retention pond in the green area to the parking lot, and then beyond to where it actually meets the building. Then moving around finally here, almost back to where we started on County Road E, this is a look back at the proposed site from County Road E, looking at the side of the building that would face towards the neighbor to the east. Approximately 2/3 of this side of the building is that single-story level associated with the internal parking garage, with units above the parking garage towards County Road E. The applicant noted for staff that they made an effort to minimize windows and openings on this side of the building to limit impact on the surrounding neighborhood and the adjacent neighbor. So, as I mentioned, the Planning Commission looked at this at their April meeting. They held a public hearing to review the project, heard a presentation from staff and from the applicant. More detailed information about that is included in your packet. Overall, there were 13 people who commented during the public hearing. 3 were generally supportive of the project, while 10 were opposed. In addition to those comments during the public hearing, the city received approximately 10 written comments, 11 as of tonight, with just one more submitted. Of those 11, in this case now, 3 were in support of that application, and 8 were opposed. And then there was actually a petition submitted to the city regarding the proposed project, in stating that the petition was opposed to it, and it included 39 signatures as of tonight's meeting, and I understand that some additional signatures were just handed to the city clerk and distributed to the council tonight. Not having seen or had a chance to review in detail the other comments that came in tonight, but just summing up generally what the major concerns that have been provided as feedback on this application include the overall density of the project, the setbacks or the reduced setbacks as they move up closer towards Bel Air and County Road E, the overall height of the building, the parking and related traffic from the building, site visibility as it relates to the buildings and their being closer to the corners of the property, and then stormwater management and its impact or potential impact on Pepper Tree Pond. So as I mentioned, we look at this, the applicant actually has 2 applications before the city tonight. The first one, again, is the rezoning proposal to R6. The city's zoning standards outline 6 specific standards for the city to make findings on related to taking action on a rezoning. And these are the 6 categories, and I'm just going to move through in the next few slides to talk about these specific standards and the findings that were elaborated in more detail in your staff report. So looking specifically at the first one, which is consistency with the 2040 comprehensive plan and the city's other plans. If you take a look, as we've mentioned here a couple of times now, the property is guided in the comprehensive plan as neighborhood mixed use. It's probably important to mention here that the beginning of any staff review and conversations with any property owner who would come in and say, we would like to do something different with the property than what it's currently zoned for. The first place we look is what the comprehensive plan says. So we look at the future land use map to see how the property is guided to be used in the future, and we look at the general goals and policies related to that. So again, that's how we got to the mixed use zoning category. As you can see, the future land use map on this slide, and the property zoned neighborhood mixed use. If you look in the language associated with the neighborhood mixed use category, it details uses that are allowed in there, and that includes apartment and townhome uses. And so the application is consistent with that language. It also outlines a specific density range for that category as 16 to 34 units per acre. And so what you do is you take a look at the size of the property and you use that range, and doing the math associated with the size of the property, you come to a range between 10 and 22 units for this particular property in total units. And in just looking at that range of 10 to 22 units, the overall proposal is only 1 unit above what is the mid-range or the median range of that 10 to 22 units. So the median range, the middle figure, 16 units, and there it's 17. We also took a look at consistency with the recently adopted County Road E Corridor Action Plan. This specific site was identified as a priority site and looked at through a modeling of exercise and of the number of options that were listed that were reviewed as part of that project. Density, the apartments and townhomes of this density range are generally consistent with the findings that came out of that staff report, or that plan. The next, and it's also, we also looked at consistency with the city's housing plans. The city has a housing policy task force that recently approved a number of recommendations, and the city's overall goals within the comp plan and what we've talked about recently of trying to expand existing housing to provide more life cycle housing, it's consistent with those plans of the city as well. So after we look at consistency with the city's plans, we take a look at compatibility with present and future land uses. So existing land uses around the site, everyone probably remembers, are generally commercial uses on the corners to the north and west, and to, the north and west and to the west, and then a vacant property to the north. Taking a look at the proposed or future land use categories, which again is what you see in the map here, the surrounding corners are all guided as mixed use residential, or neighborhood mixed use, and then with the surrounding residential neighborhood to the south and to the east. Taking a look at, now moving on to the next set of standards would be conformance with the zoning standards. And in this case, we would look at the zoning standards of what the applicant is proposing, not the current zoning standards, which is a commercial standard. So looking at the rezoning to R6, medium density residential, the review finds that it's consistent with all of the zoning standards with the exception of one, and that's related to setbacks, and looking at those in more detail. Looking at the maximum height in the R6 district of 35 feet, the applicant, again, has designed their plans to come in under those standards for both the apartment building and the townhome units. The setbacks for the R6 district include 30 feet on basically all the street-facing sides of it, and then a 15-foot setback on the interior or east-facing side that is shared with the neighbors. And so while it exceeds, it has a 25-foot setback on the east side shared with the neighbors, so it exceeds that minimum standard. It does have lesser setbacks and doesn't meet the standards along the street-facing sides of this. That was a deliberate decision by the applicant in a way to move the overall activity and buildings of the site further away from the adjacent neighborhoods. It's consistent with the overall design and use intentions of the mixed-use district, and also consistent, even with these reduced setbacks, there have been some questions about sight lines at the corners of the intersection, and even with these reduced setbacks, you can see on the site plan on this side, the required site distance triangle is shown at both Bel Air and Jansen, and Bel Air and County Road E, and the building does not encroach into those areas. So the parking standards are then, again, what we looked at next. At 17 units, it's required to provide 2 stalls per unit, at least 1 enclosed. The applicant has a total of 34 units, again, 22 interior and 12 surface parking stalls. The applicant has also, there was some conversation about whether or not the applicant would charge for parking, that in some way that could provide an incentive for residents to park off-site, and the applicant has agreed to part of the PUD to agree that they would not charge additional fee for off-street parking. So in an attempt to show some comparisons of the surrounding zoning and what the applicant is proposing here, the top chart shows the R3 zoning district, which is the surrounding single-family district. And then the R5 and R6 districts, which are the districts that could fit within the mixed-use zoning category, and then the B3 or an auto-oriented current zoning for the property. And just taking a look quickly through this, uses, you can see that it progresses from one-unit dwellings in the R3 to 1, 2, 3, or 4-unit buildings and townhouses in R5, to the proposal which before you tonight, which is the same uses that are allowed in R5, but also as apartments in R6. The B3 district has a list of auto-oriented and commercial uses that we can go into if you'd like, but generally you should just be thinking of them as commercial uses. But then if you look at comparisons of the development standards in each of these districts, the front yard setbacks are virtually the same at 30 feet throughout, with the exception of R5 that does go down to 25. The side yard setbacks, again, very consistent with either 10 for an internal shared lot line with a neighbor, or 30 feet associated with a setback along a roadway. Height limitations, again, consistent throughout the district, or consistent throughout these districts. In the residential areas, the same at 35 feet, but then the B3 district specifically calling out 3 stories and 36 feet. And then looking at the parking standards, again, 2 per unit, pretty much across the board for the residential. The only difference being in the single family, there's a requirement for all of those to be enclosed, with in the R5 and R6 it allows for one of those to be enclosed. And then if you look at densities throughout these different zoning districts, you also see from the comprehensive plan in that R3 district 3 to 9 units per acre. But in looking at the neighborhood mixed use that would apply to either R5 or R6, you see the same 16 to 34 units per acre. And as the commercial use doesn't allow residential uses, there isn't a residential use to compare there. But then if you look at specifically the setback standards that the applicant has proposed, you can see that the chart that's below here shows that they have greater setbacks for the apartment building on the side and the rear, which are shown with the arrows here on the site, and then a greater setback, as I think we've really mentioned a lot, is the 25-foot setback that is greater as the requirement for the neighbors. So moving on through the zoning analysis, then the next criteria for the city to consider is how the use, if the use will depreciate surrounding areas. And so in this case, what staffs find is the proposal is the applicant is making a substantial investment to redevelop a long-term vacant and blighted property on the site, consistent with the city standards that we've already talked about tonight. The residential use in general is a better transition to the surrounding neighborhood, even in staff's opinion, even than the other commercial uses that could be allowed under the current zoning. The next standard then takes a look at the use and whether or not it can be accommodated by existing public facilities. If you take a look specifically at the stormwater management standards, which we'll go into in more detail in a few moments, it meets or exceeds all of those standards, and then is also consistent with the water and sewer needs of services that are provided in the surrounding area. And then finally, we take a look at the traffic generated by the site and whether or not it's within the capabilities of the surrounding streets. The map on the slide that you see before you is the city's functional classification map, or defines what each street is intended to be or how it's intended to function. And so you can see the site is located on the corner of either collector or arterial streets designed to handle traffic from the surrounding local streets in those neighborhoods. The proposal also includes the idea of moving the access off of Jansen Avenue and closing 2 of the access points that are closer to the intersection and have the potential to have greater traffic conflicts if they were used. And then finally, we take a look at the landscaping standards related to the rezoning. And so the landscaping plan on the site you see here is included in your packet. It generally shows, again, the 25-foot setback area along the east side of the property, adjacent to the neighbors, and that area being filled with its stormwater management area, which includes a variety of plants, shrubs, and trees in an effort to screen that area. There's also additional plantings and trees that surround the building on all the street sides and at the base of the building in an attempt to, again, provide a more residential character. And some of those landscaping elements are shown in the elevation drawings that we've shown in larger size in the previous slides. And so, with that, before we move on to looking at the PUD section of the zoning request, we thought it's a good point at this time to talk about the stormwater management of the site as it relates to the zoning standards.
Mayor, members of the council, I'll run through just general stormwater for the site. I'll start with a little bit of background both for the site as well as stormwater management as we know it today, I guess. So if you look at the slide on the screen, you can kind of see progression of the area around Pepper Tree Pond as well as Heiner's Pond to the south. Starting back in 1940, we have air photos that kind of document how the area has developed and progressed. So in 1940, it was basically undeveloped, some rural residential, it looks like out there. Then as we move into the 70s, you can see the area to the west of Pepper Tree Pond starts developing. We have, as well as the area around Pepper Tree Pond. And then the furthest right air photo shows basically the entire area developed by the mid-'80s. The green square that's in the upper left-hand corner of each of those photos is the subject site that we're talking about today under the application. Important to note that both Pepper Tree Pond and Heiner's Pond are classified as public waters. The Pepper Tree Pond specifically being a public water wetland. So you can see kind of how things have changed and really just changed shape throughout development. And that's development changing that. That's not naturally occurring. Kind of where we get to we'll be talking about specifically about the site. So kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, the EPA did a study called the National Urban Runoff Protection or National Urban Runoff Program. Released the first comprehensive study that ever looked at stormwater and pollutants. So that by 1987, the EPA enacted a lot of those studies, and by the early 90s actually required municipalities to permit permanent stormwater as well as construction stormwater techniques to prevent runoff and to prevent damage to our lakes and wetlands and receiving bodies. Also in this time frame, the Wetland Conservation Act was also enacted. So as you see the progression of the ponds and wetlands on the site, we would not be able to do that today without extensive mitigation. We can't change or modify those wetlands or public waters without mitigating or taking into account those impacts. So that's kind of where kind of the basis of where we're going to go with the discussion with the subject site. So if you want to. So the drainage area specifically to Pepper Tree Pond, you can see kind of in the pink outline there, the subject site in the black rectangle at the upper left-hand corner of that area. So that's the area that drains directly to Pepper Tree Pond. As I stated, this area was developed, the overall drainage area was developed before those stormwater management requirements were in place. And all of it drains directly to, the yards drain to the streets, to the underground stormwater pipe system, directly into Pepper Tree Pond, including the subject parcel. So it is within that direct Pepper Tree Pond drainage area. Looking at that overall area, we have just over 55 acres that are included that drain directly to it. The subject site, as Jason had mentioned, is 0.67 acres or approximately 1.2% of that total drainage area. Next slide. So the subject site, in kind of getting down into the specific area, you can see the subject site highlighted in the black rectangle. The arrows generally flow or show where that water flows to today. So some of it goes north to County Road E into a storm sewer system, an underground pipe system that goes through some side yard easement. So the city has, as part of the development, had been granted easement to put that piping system between those homes. That drained directly to Pepper Tree Pond. Some of it, a small portion, as we'll get to the next slides, go into a storm sewer system on Jansen that also goes into that directly into Pepper Tree Pond. Next slide. So as part of the stormwater review process, and we'll get to that more in detail in just a minute, but you can see the existing proposed drainage areas. So the developer is required to study that specific site to see where the stormwater goes currently, and then where they, as part of their development, where all of the stormwater will go in the future. So if you look at the exhibit or the diagram on the left side of the screen, the existing site, the area highlighted in orange goes up to the County Road E system, back around through that easement that I had just shown you. And then the area in purple goes to Jansen and then down through that south storm sewer system. And they ultimately end up in the same spot. The existing impervious area is just over 19,000 square feet, and current stormwater, like the rest of that drainage area, has no stormwater treatment or rate control to speak of other than Pepper Tree Pond itself. Looking at the proposed drainage for the site, the area in orange is now going to be routed to that stormwater feature, which is a biofiltration basin. The area that's shown in purple will continue to go directly into Jansen. It's a grassed area or vegetated area that will, some water will flow off of that into Jansen. So again, it's the same amount of water that is going to the same place following development. One thing to note is the impervious area is just about 50 square feet greater in the proposed conditions. However, with the stormwater treatment and the biofiltration basin, that basin collects the stormwater, it infiltrates it into an underground tile system that then is discharged, so it treats the water as it flows through that soil that is placed in that biofiltration basin along with the plants. The roots uptake a lot of the water and hold on to those nutrients that help clean that water before it's then discharged into the County Road E storm sewer system. Again, we're going from zero stormwater treatment to that. Basically, the majority of the site is being treated by that biofiltration basin. So just kind of going into our review process. So typically what happens is the applicant submits under even that concept design. We start our review looking at does this site meet city engineering design standards, as well as the watershed districts. So we also look at to make sure that they're meeting theirs. We haven't gotten that far yet, whether they actually need a watershed district permit, but our city standards do meet or exceed those watershed district standards as well. So the things that we look at are quantity control, so keeping some of that water on site with the biofiltration basin, the plant uptake, some infiltration into that basin as well. And then obviously the treatment through that filtration to get the nutrients and sediment and things out of that water before it's discharged into the storm sewer system. One other thing that's important to note is, as going through with the process, that the developer would be required to enter into an operations and maintenance agreement that we will do periodic inspections to make sure that filtration basin and the stormwater management controls on that site are functioning properly as we go through time. If they need to do improvements, clean things out, replant things, they are required to do that under that agreement. Next slide. So as far as the analysis of that stormwater management goes, so really what a few of the things that we look at are the rate of flow off of the site. So we look at the common events that we look at are the 2, 10, and 100-year event, as well as the snowmelt event. And we look at how that biofiltration basin or stormwater management technique is holding the water before discharging off of the site. So the negative numbers that you see on the bottom of each of the charts shows that based on either stormwater management or in the right table, Jansen Avenue, where it's just grass without going into, or vegetation without going into the biofiltration basin. It's a change in a lot of what used to go to Jansen Avenue was, obviously it was more, but it was also, some of it was driveway and impervious surface. So if we look at the bottom numbers, the negative means that they are reducing the amount or the flow. As far as the snow melt goes, so in the spring when the ground is frozen, that basin is sized large enough to hold that snow melt until basically the ground can thaw out enough until that can start infiltrating into that filtration system. Again, like I said, from a volume control and water quality standards, the biofiltration and the vegetated area meet all of our volume requirements. As well as treatment requirements, and it's important to note that they would also meet the Ramsey, Washington Metro Watershed District's standards as well. So I'll turn it back over to Jason.
So, Mayor, members of the council, up until this point, we've been talking about the first of the 2 applications before the council tonight. So everything we've talked about right up to this point has been talking about the zoning standards that would be normal for any development that came into the R6 district, from either the zoning standards to the stormwater management that we just talked about. So the second part of the applicant's application includes that PUD or planned unit development application. And that application allows a developer some flexibility from the standard zoning requirements in exchange for an overall higher quality development. In this case, it's necessary to allow more than one building on a lot, so the apartment building and then the separate row home building, and then the request for the decreased setbacks along the perimeter or street sides of the property. So other than that, the proposal meets all of the zoning standards and stormwater management standards associated with any other property that would be associated with the R6 district. And then, so what happens with a PUD is again, there's an expectation of an exchange that if the city's willing to vary from some standard or deviate from some standard in some way, that developer comes back and does things above and beyond the city's standards in exchange for that deviation. So in this case, what the developer is offering in exchange for those reduced setbacks and having 2 buildings on one lot is setbacks that are consistent with the overall mixed-use, neighborhood mixed-use future land use category design standards, walk-up apartments along Bel Air Avenue that create a more residential and pedestrian-friendly setting, enhanced exterior building materials, again, designed to fit more closely into the overall White Bear Lake and residential surrounding neighborhood. Design of the pit of the roof from a flat roof now to a pitched roof, and including dormers that lessen the overall height of the building. The vertical pillars that I mentioned along the building, again, designed to give it more of a residential appearance and break the building up into smaller pieces. Increased transparency is the word that's used in the zoning ordinance, so basically that just means increased glass along the lower levels to, again, provide a more pedestrian-friendly and neighborhood-focused design. Interior bicycle storage for the residents of the building. And then in addition, the applicants, as I mentioned, agreed to provide a pedestrian sidewalk along Jansen Avenue to address those safety concerns that were raised by the neighborhood. In addition to all those things, staff is also asking the developer to run conduit in the garage when they build the building to allow for future RV charging for the residents of this building should they decide to do that. And then to also include native trees and plantings to reduce irrigation needs for the overall site. So really, this last slide here just kind of sums up the review process that's happened that staff has talked about to this point. So overall, the site is being redeveloped, is going to redevelop a long-term vacant site with a blighted property consistent with the city goals that we've mentioned in the comprehensive plan, the housing goals, and the city's recently adopted County Road E-Corridor plan. The overall design, the applicant, again, redesigned from the original concept plan to meet the R6 zoning standards, or to meet or exceed those standards, excuse me. And really, again, the only deviation or change that the applicant is requesting here is greater setbacks, reduce setbacks along the street sides of the property to provide a greater setback or distance from the surrounding neighborhood. And again, as we just kind of talked about, in addition to all those design standards, and what the applicant has offered in exchange for the PUD are increased setbacks, buffering, and landscaping from the adjacent residential neighborhood, decreasing the overall site to under the 35-foot height limit, enhance site design and architecture in an attempt to make the development fit closer into the overall White Bear setting, and then specifically a more residential appearance. Street activation with those reduced setbacks closer to the street and those walk-up residential units. Addressing pedestrian safety by adding the sidewalk, and then, as I mentioned, the future conduit for future electrical vehicle charging, and native landscaping to reduce irrigation needs on the site. And so with that, the items before you again are the first reading of the rezoning to R6 and consideration of the PUD under the standards that we just talked about. And so with that, staff can stand for questions. The applicant is also here tonight and has provided a number of slides that he would like to walk through with the council.
Thank you, Mr. Lindahl. Why don't we hear next from the applicant if they have some formal remarks or presentation. Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. I'm Ryan McKilligan. First off, I want to say thanks to the citizens and staff and Planning Commission and City Council of White Bear Lake. We recognize, as with all of the infill projects that we do, that this is a difficult process at best. I recognize that this can be stressful for the neighborhood with the idea of the place that they live potentially changing. I recognize that the city staff has done a lot of work in administrating this proposal, and I can also appreciate that these are very difficult decisions for Planning Commission and City Council. So we do appreciate everybody for their open, candid, and honest feedback in this process. And I think it begs the question, why go through all of this at all? And I ask myself that sometimes. And yes, some days I legitimately wonder, but there is a purpose to infill development. There are places in Minnesota that are worth preserving. For me, you know, I like to paddleboard. It's the lakes and streams that me and my dog like to go visit in southeast Minnesota or at Lake Elmo or other local places. And there's also places beyond natural value that have public utility. And it's important as a society that we can preserve those in spite of the fact that people need somewhere to live. Development has to happen, and those units are going to get built somewhere. And so it's important, and it's been a foundational principle of our company to try to find meaningful places where we can do infill development. And so what we look for is places that are currently not serving their neighborhood and their community well, and create a greater opportunity for improvement in that local area. And so that's why we find ourselves trying to go down this challenging road of infill development. We believe that there's a meaningful purpose, and we also believe that the members of this community also, on some level, want to accomplish that same purpose. So I want people to understand, and I think there's a lot of assumptions about why we've proposed the number of units we have. I want people to know that that is at the forefront of our mind. And given that there are technical challenges from architecture to engineering to zoning to finance that all weigh on this property and limit the amount of things that can be built. And so what we're really trying to do with this redesign is try to somehow find common ground between what we, from our perspective, know to be those technical challenges with the will of the council and the will of the neighborhood to try to find something that can be ultimately good for everybody involved. So I'd like to walk through the design itself, and Jason's covered quite a bit of this, so I'll make it brief, but I'll kind of try to help explain how we've made the changes we've made and how we're trying to address the will of the neighborhood and the feedback that we've received so far. Slide, please. So the first and most consistent and strongest feedback that we've had on this property throughout the process is that we need to address parking. So looking at the site plan here, we know we need to get to 2-to-1 parking, 2 stalls per residential unit, and we know we need to get to 1 enclosed stall per unit. So the previous concept was essentially 2 stories of residential over a structured parking. What you see now is essentially 3 stories of residential next to structured parking. So what that did by straightening that parking run, it eliminated a couple of corners, basically, in turning through that parking garage in the previous proposal that allowed us to find more parking. The other major change that you see here is the townhomes themselves. So those townhomes were previously 2 stories with attached parking behind. So we altered those to basically be a 3-story tuck-under concept. So from the Bel Air side and from the street, we're technically only 6 inches taller, but it allows us to shrink the depth of that building so we can also have 2 tandem parking stalls behind each of those townhome units. So we're not counting those tandem parking stalls for the overall 2-to-1 ratio, but they will in fact create some parking relief for the guests of those townhomes. Additionally, in our previous proposal, arguably our management plan was going to be difficult to enforce, and so we've cleaned that up so that basically all we're doing in terms of management is agreeing within the PUD agreement that we won't charge for parking. And the intent with that is to make sure that people are incentivized to, in fact, use the parking that we've built in the structure and on-site with the off-street parking. So we're also showing turn radiuses that we've added. There are a couple of parking spots that, again, arguably were probably going to be difficult to get in and out of And so we've addressed that with basically buffers next to those parking stalls on the north wall of that parking structure to make sure that those cars can get in and out, and those will be functional parking spots. Additionally, and it's not something that we were necessarily asked for, but I do think it's important in trying to create an attractive development that does effectively activate the neighborhood. All of this parking is consolidated to the southeast corner of the site, so it's not visible from Bel Air or County Road E. And where it's visible from Jansen, there's a robust landscaping screen that'll diminish basically the impact of that surface parking as much as we possibly can for the members of the neighborhood. Slide. So the next important feedback that we got was building height. With all of these different proposals, it is our goal as well to try to find a design that does blend into the neighborhood. That's important for marketability, and it's important for maintaining the aesthetic of that neighborhood. So what overall the building, the tallest part of the building, which is the apartment structure there at the corner of County Road E and Bel Air, is about 8 feet shorter than the previous proposal. And so by not only shrinking the height itself, but trying to build dormers into that roof, we're trying to basically create the most residential and lowest feeling building in addition to the technical height as well. So we're currently at 31 feet, which would be allowable by current code, the zoning code of the R6 district that we're proposing to be rezoned to, as well as the R2 district of the neighboring residential neighborhood. Slide. So stormwater was the next thing that really came up a lot. And I can very much appreciate, especially for the people that live on Pepper Tree Pond, how critical of an issue that is. And I think without having a technical understanding of it, that's a scary proposition to have a new project here where that stormwater will in fact make its way to Pepper Tree Pond. So I can appreciate that anxiety. That being said, there are engineering practices that are reliable and consistent and have been proven techniques to properly treat that stormwater and create a better situation than what we currently have. And so what we're proposing, as the city engineer laid out well, is basically a bioswale on the east side of the property where we'll direct all of our stormwater both from the parking lot as well as the roof structures of the buildings, where that volume control can be held, and then we'll filter that water and then control the rate that it runs off after a storm. So while we're on this slide, I'll also address landscaping. So the intent, and we got a lot of feedback that, people wanting to try to preserve the existing trees and wanting robust landscaping in order to try to enhance the natural aesthetic of the property. And so what we've tried to do is from any angle from 360 degrees around the property, create a robust planting schedule that includes trees, multiple different buffers at different heights around the parking, significant buffers along the neighbor's property line, and then also columnar trees along Bel Air and Jansen that help to break up the elevations of both the townhome structure as well as the apartment structure. I'll point out the sidewalk that we're proposing to build across the Jansen Avenue curb cut as well. So this is to be built by the developer, and basically what we're attempting to accomplish is address as safely as we possibly can pedestrians that would be wanting to walk from the residential neighborhood across that driveway and onto Bel Air and/or County Road E. Slide. So this is the view from Jansen Avenue. The one difference than what we're showing here, there's basically a solid row of bushes that are going to cover or basically surround that parking, surface parking structure that we're not showing here so that people can see the context of the building. But in addition to the trees that we're planting there, that surface parking area will basically be completely screened by bushes at the lower level. So what we're trying to do as much as we possibly can is replace those trees, preserve as many as we can first, but try to create, as much of a vegetated screen of the property as we can from the neighborhood. We have had the good fortune of meeting our immediate neighbors who are here tonight. They're friendly folks. One of the things we talked about in trying to alleviate their concerns with the proposal was to increase the height of the fence, the privacy fence, on the east boundary of the property. And so that would be something where a quick review of city fence ordinance requires no more than a 6-foot privacy fence, but it's something that we're certainly willing and eager to provide, and so we would be looking for approval of that within the PUD agreement as well. Slide. So, generally speaking, there was mostly positive feedback in a lot of ways about the design itself. But what we wanted to try to do with the redesign was accomplish something that was more unique to White Bear Lake as opposed to something that could be simply anywhere. That can be tricky. County Road E doesn't really have a common thread of architecture. But if you spend enough time around Lake Avenue and downtown White Bear Lake and throughout the surrounding area, you can start to get a feel for the sort of craftsmanship and some sort of key elements that seem to be common throughout that area. And so what we're trying to do is, one of the key themes is that all of those high-quality architecture buildings in the area are very residential. There's quite a bit of craftsman-type architecture as well as shingle-type architecture. So we're trying to take elements of that and basically create something as residential as we possibly can, creating as many shadow lines to break up the elevation of the apartment building as we can. We've introduced higher quality and more varied materials. So we've got a stone facade essentially throughout the first floor of the building that most closely interacts with the streetscape. And like I said, trying with that design to achieve something that could be easily associated with White Bear Lake. This rendering here omits the trees that would be in front of the apartment building and the townhomes, just for clarity, to be able to see what the buildings themselves look like. But there would be columnar trees along that Bel Air side of the project. Slide. So, as I mentioned, we believe that there's a meaningful purpose to infill development. And we also recognize that there is a lot of anxiety from the neighborhood about this proposal. What I believe to be the commonality is that everybody wants something to get done. And we're certainly committed to that. That being said, there are, like I mentioned, technical details that have to get addressed that apply to architecture, zoning, finance, that make infill difficult. And it's no surprise, infill is always going to be difficult. This site in particular, there's a lot of friction because your context at the northwest corner of the site is very different than it is at the southeast corner of the site. And that's something that us or any other developer is always going to face. That being said, we've appreciated being able to work in this town, and have appreciated the open and candid feedback, and we look forward to trying to move forward somehow with this project. And pending any questions, that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. McKillian. I suspect the council will have questions, but why don't we put a pin in that for now, and we'll hear from some comments from folks, and maybe we'll invite you back up if we have some. Thank you. All right. So here's how this is going to go. At this time, I am going to listen to public comment. We'll open it up for public comment. I just want to note that a few things. One, there's been multiple opportunities to comment on this at the Planning Commission at neighborhood meetings, and I think a lot of you folks have attended those. And I'll note that just sitting up here at the dais, we've got copies of the petition. I can speak for myself and a few other council members. I'm sure everybody's read many of the emails that have come our way, so we're aware of a lot of the objections, but this kind of is the last stop. So at this time, I am going to open it up for public comment. We're going to pose a couple of rules because I see a lot of people in the audience, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to be heard. 2 minutes apiece. State your name and address for the record. Try not to be too redundant of what others have said because we're aware of what many of the arguments are. But if we can limit it to 2 minutes, I want to hear from anybody who wants to speak to this issue. I do have a list in front of me. There was a sign up. If you didn't make it on the list, that's fine. We'll have a chance to jump in. So I'm just going to start reading names again. Come up to the podium, say your name and address, and we'll hear from you. So, and I'll apologize if I butcher some of the names and it's a little hard to read. There's a Joel Parsevich, maybe? Paskovich, please, sir, step up.
Thank you all for hearing me out. And where did our builder go? There. Thank you for all your hard work.
Joe, can you state your name and address for the record?
Okay, I'm sorry. Joe Pavkovich, 3517 Bel Air Avenue. I've lived in White Bear Lake since 1973. I've lived in this neighborhood at 3517 Bel Air Avenue since 1976. So I'm very familiar with the area. I know what's in the area. I know what the area can hold. I know what the area can't hold. I think this is just a bad concept with compressing so much into one little space. Traffic, everything's gonna be terrible. Where's that one slide that you showed of from Jansen Avenue? I'd like to see that again. That one, yeah. Now, where those trees are and all those nice flowers and everything, that's a 25-foot setback. That looks to me like about 100 feet. I mean, just looking at it. I mean, it's a very nice picture, but it doesn't paint the real picture. I just see all that traffic coming out on the Jansen Avenue. In the wintertime when it's icy, they might be sliding down the hill into the houses down there. I don't know. You know, people do stupid things. Two of your slides mentioned that properties were going to maintain their values and get better, basically. I saw that on two of your slides. And I was not going to bring up a point of contention from the Planning Commission because I feel that's for a different time. But since you guys brought it up, I have to as well. I was told at that meeting that projects like this are in demand in White Bear Lake because White Bear's concept is to build these to decrease values around it so younger people can afford older homes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that your concept? Because if it is, it's totally, you know what? It's sticking it up the rear of all those people that pay taxes all these years, and I just don't buy that. Okay, and if anybody wants to take me up on that personally, I'd be more than happy to. I've sold real estate in this town for 47 years also. I know what taxes are, what they generate. This particular piece of property, I know is paying about $2,200, $2,300 a year in taxes. When this concept, the way it is, if it's all finished, it's probably going to be drawing about $50,000 in taxes. Now, all of that doesn't go to White Bear. I understand the distribution of your property taxes. But my goodness, going forward, please use your heads and make the right decision. We don't want it. Not in this form. We're open, but not to this. Too much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I have Judy and Larry, BEHM, BEM. Those folks here, please step up and tell us your thoughts.
Good evening. This is kind of new for me.
Yeah, if you could state
My name's
your-
Larry
Thank you.
Bame, and 3511 Bel Air.
Thank you.
And I've lived here since 1995. So we love the area. We got some decent neighbors. I understand that we need something on those corners, this specific corner. I think that this is just too much for the area, just crammed in there too much. To me, it's kind of like my house is so big and I decide to build a 30 by 40 pole barn in my backyard, even though it's big enough. I doubt that'd go over too well. I appreciate the builder. He's really done his job there, and I appreciate you folks that you got a lot to consider here. But I still, my thoughts are just too much, so I'm actually against it. So something should go in there. My thought would be maybe the townhouses. That would be would work in the area a lot better. And the same thing is the setback on the neighbor that'll be right next there. I would not want to be him living there with the apartments and the townhouses. So, thank you.
Sir. I have Roberta and Bill Colasar.
I'm going to pass. I mean,
Sure.
he said that it's just too large, and that's my feeling.
Appreciate it.
Hey, Zone 6 is not workable.
Thank you. I have an Al, I can't really read the handwriting, Al B.
I think it's R.
R. Please.
Al Rivard, 3590 Glen Oaks Avenue. I brought the petition around the neighborhood. Basically, everybody to the southeast of that building for a couple blocks and south on Bel Air for a couple blocks. And there was nobody in any of those areas that answered their door that were for this project. And I had two people, which were at the edges of where I went, that did not sign the petition. One of them wanted nothing to do with anything political. And one of them said she was going to be coming to the meetings and she'd rather do it that way. But there was a very, to me, a lot of people were saying they were in favor of this. I think the meetings I've been at, that somebody's been in favor of this, didn't live in the area. They were living a mile or more away. I'm a lot less concerned about something a mile or more away from my house also. The setbacks just do not fit the neighborhood. Typically, neighborhoods go from housing to a townhouse to apartments. Here we're going directly to apartments. I listened a bit when the developer was talking to Mr. Vang about the area down here. I live, water that gets down on Jansen goes right by the front of my house. I'm a little bit concerned about more water coming down that way. It gets to be quite a bit in heavy rains right now. He told Mr. Vang not to worry about it because all those people will be underwater before he gets water in his yard. I'm one of those people down the hill, so I did not appreciate that comment. He said that this water would go up to County Road E, and I heard that stated again here. This did not show that elevation very well. That corner is really high. County Road E is very high behind all those houses on Glen Oaks over there. So this thing, if it's dug down some more yet, is going to be even lower. And the only way that I can see that's going to when we get a rain of anything over the drought conditions, we're going to get water running out of that. And I think they said today it would go to Jansen, but it would go to County Road E. Is there going to be a pump to pump it up to County Road E, or is there going to be a drain going into the existing storm sewer there? I haven't heard any answer on that. I guess I'd really like to hear what that is, because that water would otherwise have to magically jump up about 10 feet. There's never been any parking. I've lived in that house for about 15 years. I lived in Bel Air further down for another 10 before that. And I never recall seeing a car parked on Bel Air Avenue in that block before the lights. When you put sidewalks for the apartment owners down to Bel Air, I think you're just encouraging them to park on Bel Air. I do travel Bel Air down to the County Road F area. And summertime, depending how the people park there, is not too bad. Wintertime, it's terrible. It was better last year because they did some towing. But there's not room for snow removal. I had trees removed from my backyard, my house, backside of it's towards Bel Air. I had trees taken out from there by White Bear Public Works people, and they said, well, we need that to make it easier to plow. I don't know how this is going to be for plowing here. I think it's going to be terrible. And if it looks like County Road, Bel Air and County Road F has in the winters, I don't know if any of you have ever traveled that, but that's absolutely terrible and not safe.
And sir, I just want to be respectful of others. We've exceeded the 2 minutes. If you could. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. I have a Janelle.
That's me. And go past.
Very good. Thank you. Mark and Pat.
Hi, Mark Biak. I'm at 3594 Glen Oaks Avenue. I'm the third house south of where this project is looking to go. And it's like they've mentioned earlier, some of the pictures that we have here, I think Joe even mentioned, doesn't show the curve. It shows a little sidewalk coming out and stopping. That's it's not a steep, but it's a good sized hill dropping down. My concern in the beginning when all this started is going up Bel Air Avenue, the third house south. I have one of the two-story homes over there. I can look out the top window or the windows of my bedroom, bathroom, and look straight at the road. Ours is set way down. Being within feet of the near highest point of Ramsey County, at that point right there, when you come over that hill, the building there at 30 feet is going to look like a tower because that's about even with the top of my house would be the base of that. And the other thing I guess I'm wondering about is what's going to be with lighting? Is there going to be other street lights? The lighting in the project and everything else is just a concern that we have with all the kids we have around there. So other than that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Lisa S.
Lisa Sigich. I'm at 3537 Glen Oaks Avenue. First of all, it's beautiful. It really is. I'd happily live there right now. But I do agree with a lot of the people. the size and the runoff and all that, but my main concern is the traffic that will be generated. As you already know, there's a lot of schools around there. I'm concerned about what congestion and parking that could happen on that corner of County Road E and Bel Air. Many times I've told my children, you have to be careful. We've had so many close calls where we've almost gotten hit, or people we're walking with have almost gotten hit. And in August of 2021, I was hit there just walking across the street. And I fractured my kneecap. Somebody just made a left turn right into me. And I sweat every single day when my son takes his bike to school, but I still have to let him live. And I just think how much worse it's going to be if we have so many more people just suddenly concentrated there. So my concern is for all the new children that are living on our street. I do agree, we do need something there. I just would prefer it's not so much traffic right there in the corner where it's already so scary. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Green.
Hi, Chris Green, 3587 Glen Oaks Avenue. This is also related to the subject of traffic. I think there's some confusion, at least I have some, and I think others do as well, about whether entry on Jansen Avenue into this project, however it may end up being, is allowed or required. And I think a lot of the concerns about traffic could be alleviated if there were entry to a smaller development and the entry was on Bel Air rather than on Jansen. There's an understanding that I had heard somewhere that the least busy road is required, that's the one that has to be used for access to the property. And if an exception can be made to this, where the entry would not be off of Jansen and instead would be on Bel Air, that combined with a scaled back project, I think would alleviate many of the traffic concerns that my neighbors have. Not that I'm speaking for them, but I think this entry off of Jansen is a point of concern for many people. And so I think that should be put into consideration, whether the entry to whatever ends up getting built there can remain as it is now on Bel Air. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Branwell. My apologies if
My name is Lee Branwell. I live at 3583 Glen Oaks Avenue. A lot of people have said things that I was going to say, but a few things I'd like to make clear, and that is when the developer talks about the height of the building, he's not talking about the physical height, because a strange thing, it's to the midpoint of the gable. So what would the peak of that building be height? But another 6 feet maybe. So it's a much taller building. And then I'd like to ask Jason, when you said to the letters, there were 3 people who wrote letters that were for. Now, were they people who lived in the area?
Council, Mayor, members of the council, Lee, the letters that were included, the letters are included in the packet and have been in both the planning commission packet and the council packet tonight.
But you don't know offhand then?
I do not remember the address of those.
Okay, because as Al was saying, he went around the whole neighborhood and basically, there was nobody there, and there's a lot of people, as you know, that are concerned about it. And one of the things I guess I'd like to have done is that in that packet was some photos I took of that area. Can you show those?
Lee, I'm sorry, I did not include those in the presentation for tonight, but they are included in the packet.
Okay, so you can get an idea what, County Road E and Bel Air looks like now. And there's nothing around County Road E or Bel Air that's over basically 1 story, and everything that is there is set back and far from the street, unlike this, which is going to be very close to the street. And I know the developer said there was a lot of positive feedback on the building design, and I'm not sure where that came from, because I'm not aware of anybody in our neighborhood. You all have the letters, you have the petitions, you see the number of people, and, you know, basically everybody who lives in that whole area is against this proposal. And, you know, the height, the setbacks, and those things. And so, you know, all of us who have signed the petitions and the letters and spoken, you know, we're all against it, and most of us are longtime residents of the neighborhood. And we love living here, and we love the way it is. And it's not that we're against change, we're just against this particular proposal. And by the way, I want to thank Kaylee, the city clerk here. She's been very helpful when we've needed things and talked to her. And so I would just ask the city council to not approve this. And for all of us residents who live there, and I've lived in White Bear since 1967, originally down on 2311 Orchard Lane. And then I moved to this. We had this house built in 1981. So I just ask you if you'd please, you know, listen to us and make some of your constituents happy.
Thank you, Mr. Branwell. Sarah Copeland.
I'll pass.
Kathy Pavloni.
Kathy Pavloni, 3527 Glen Oaks Avenue. And I don't know if you can pull up the slide again from Jansen. That one. It's really pretty, but that's impossible. It's way out of proportion. I mean, we'd probably all vote for that, but that's not going to work. My concern is it's similar to what other people have said, the busy intersection. And I would think this area would be attractive to college students, maybe going to Century College, for students sharing a 2-bedroom apartment. There's not going to be parking for 4 cars. My concern is cars then parking on Jansen and on the adjacent streets, and then kids on bikes. I just watched 3 little boys. They looked about 11. I think they were riding their bikes to school on Monday. They're there at that intersection, and I don't know if they're going to Sunrise, Level Up, Matoska. There's 3 schools there. And just concerned potential street parking adding to complicate things and safety. Thanks.
Thank you. I have resident Callie Longendijk.
Good evening. Those satellite images were fascinating. Thank you for that. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager Crawford, and staff. I come before you as a resident of 2579 Elm Drive. My name is Callie Longendijk. I have the privilege of waking up every day and looking out my window and seeing Pepper Tree Pond. It's one of the features I talk about when I describe where I live. When I first heard about the development, my first thought, boy, I hope those renters like crepes and coffee, because the business that Bean Co. could get, they would really benefit. And that's the only thing we have at that 4-corner intersection, a coffee shop that I don't know it'll make it. I drive by it twice a day. I also drive by the abandoned gas station twice a day. It's the entrance to my neighborhood. It's the entrance where my friends and family are greeted when they come off of the County Road E corridor. Ever since I've moved to White Bear Lake, the entrance to my neighborhood has been an experiment, testing the broken window theory. Where it runs down and shows signs of crime, more is to come. I'm afraid we'll also be stuck with an abandoned coffee shop soon. I had the opportunity to attend a community meeting last night. Included in the conversation was explanation of the difference between zones R5 and R6, with R6 being the denser and what is being proposed tonight. My understanding it would be one or the other. The concerns I've heard, the building is too tall, not enough setback, not enough green space, safety of that intersection, it's all valid. but rezoning to the alternative, less dense R5 would not prevent these same issues. It may address the density, but that doesn't guarantee the developer will submit plans for R5. And no developer, and we're stuck with the boarded up gas station, and the runoff we're all worried about, including myself, would continue unfiltered into the pond. And if we're worried about the runoff, we should be more worried it's sitting in its current state today. After college as a young professional and before settling into White Bear Lake, I rented 3 apartments and a townhome. And finally, I'm a proud homeowner to a 1960s Rambler in White Bear Lake. But that was not before renting my home for a year and only being met with a not so common opportunity of purchasing it from my landlord. 2 incomes and no children yet. We still had to arrange a financing plan with a lower down payment option. And I'm comfortable sharing that today because I want to portray how difficult it was to purchase the home and return to the community that my husband grew up in. This was all before the housing market took off. I'm happy to say I'm now in my forever home. I became a resident of White Bear Lake as a renter, and I would not want to hinder potential opportunities for someone who has a desire to live in White Bear Lake as I did 4 years ago. And I do hear pushback to my comments saying, well, that's fine, but I don't want it here. I don't want apartments. And I truly ask why. Before the meeting, I looked on Zillow to see if I could afford to live in White Bear Lake. And there is one house listed available under $300,000. That one house is the only listing under $400,000. It wasn't until I got an additional listing when I bumped it up to $500,000. And I suppose long-established residents may not find this to be their concern, but I do because I almost didn't make it, but I got my home. It's feeling like Seattle out here. Typically, I don't like development, but I have to remember that someone probably said that about my Rambler in my neighborhood in the late 1950s. Let's all remember that about all of our homes. Built in 1920, 2020, it's all development. Let's not gatekeep the beautiful White Bear Lake. Post-COVID, I'm finally meeting my lovely neighbors, and I hope to not make enemies, but I have to talk about the silver lining. And please entertain me. The design of this building has transformed since it was first presented to council, which is proof that the developer has listened to the concerns of my neighbors and you as council. And I'm actually in awe that the changes that I saw tonight, including the vertical structures that would create shadow to break up the face of that building. Kudos to that. That was interesting. And I personally think both renderings and the materials chosen, presented at both council meetings, were thoughtful in design. The developers did not have to take any of our feedback, and they were listening, so thank you. Quite frankly, at this point, I'm worried about the sale of this property to a different buyer who won't care about what my neighbors think, or they will build something that won't require rezoning or a PUD, which means it wouldn't require neighborhood meeting, it wouldn't require public hearing, and wouldn't require a first and second reading at City Council. And to address some of the safety concerns and having children up there, something could be built there with generating more traffic and personally more safety concerns for those walking nearby. I think nowadays you just have to be careful because people are on their phones. So council, you may not get a say what goes there if something like this were to be denied. I love White Bear and I love my neighborhood, and I sincerely do. And I wouldn't be up here if I truly didn't think that this could be an option for our area. So I encourage those opposing this proposal to find the silver lining in what is being presented and really question why the opposition. Activation of the County Road E-Corridor Action Plan is before you, and I recommend moving forward with reviving and cleaning up that intersection and the entrance to my neighborhood, to potential renters for potential development, apartments maybe. I would welcome you to White Bear Lake, and I hope that you would get coffee and crepes next door. Thank you.
Long and Dyke. Those are all the names I have on my list, but I'm sure there's others in the audience, so please step forward.
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is John Knoll. I live at 2571 Elm Drive, and I'm here with my wife, Diane.
I think, and I mentioned this last night in a meeting that Kevin pulled together, I think this is all about density. And what I don't understand when I read the R4, R5, and R6 zoning ordinances that are out on the White Bear Lake site, what I see is that for an R6, which, by the way, I am not for an R6. I think an R4 or R5 could probably work. But when I look at the R6, it very clearly states that that it would be anywhere from 9 to 12 units maximum, and at 2/3 of an acre, that would take it to 6 to 8 units. I don't know where the 16 to 34 down to 10 to 22 is coming from. It certainly isn't in the R6 zoning right now, at least not the one that's posted. So maybe it's in another part of the plan. Maybe this is going to be updated. I don't know. But if I look at R4, R5, and R6, they all maximum units are set at 6 to 8. You know, R4 and R5, I think, are 6 units. I think an R6 goes up to potentially 8 units. So I have a hard time understanding why we're going 2 to 3 times what was designated for these zoning ordinances. And I think they're designated for a good reason. I mean, if you look at that space, it's 2/3 of an acre. It's tiny to put, you know, all of these apartments and other units in there. It just doesn't make any sense. I think the neighborhood would probably support something in the 6 to 8 unit range because it would make sense. So that's really my comment. I think we want change. This is just too dense, too much density for too small of an area.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? Please.
Matt Rivard, 2276 Lake Ridge Drive. My biggest concern would be the setbacks just being in traffic control and coming up, heading east on Jansen, or west on Jansen, and even taking a right-hand turn, it'd be just tough to see around that apartment building. So concerned with that setback, I saw that's where the negatives are. So that was my only concern. And then, forgive me if I'm wrong, but does the city own the north lot? To me, that would fit better on that lot. You already have parking. So just a idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? Please.
Mayor, Richard Opseth, 2564 Mayfair Avenue. Just a couple of questions. Where exactly on the site plan is that biofilter basin? I haven't seen that anywhere.
I believe
they said it was to the east of the property, but I don't see that represented.
Sorry. So if you can, sorry, Mayor, members of the council, and resident. So what you see here is the landscape plan. If you look at the north on this drawing is the top. So Bel Air Avenue is on the left side of the drawing, and County Road E is on the upper or north part of the drawing. The stormwater retention pond is the area that has the multiple lines next to it between the building and the eastern property line within that 25-foot setback area. It runs from the northern edge of the property along County Road E, basically all the way down to the southern edge of the property where it abuts Jansen Avenue. Does that clarify that for you?
Thanks. The other question I had is on the apartments. What's to prevent the developer from selling off the apartments to someone else who immediately changes policies on providing free parking? All of a sudden, parking is chargeable, and people start parking on the street. Just something to think about there.
Sure, I appreciate that.
That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue?
Frank Watson, Frank Watson, 3569 Glen Oaks, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. I'm not going to rehash what everybody said. I kind of pretty much go along with just about all of them. Question for the engineer: how much water or many gallons can the that east side swale hold?
Mayor, members of the council, I don't have that calculation. It was provided by the developer, reviewed by our environmental resources engineer. Ms. Talon, I don't know if she has, do you have that available?
I don't have cubic. The provided. Mayor, City Council, the volume that I have with me is for the filtration volume that's required, and that is 3,269 cubic feet.
You know how many gallons that is?
No, I don't know offhand. I don't know that either. But. Yeah, I do not.
I guess my point is 2/3 of an acre, 1 inch of rain is 18,000 gallons. That happens 7 times a year. If we're diverting all the water from that property into the swale, I don't know if all of it goes in there, but that's 18,000 gallons. I'm a meteorologist. I've worked on law cases where developers, counties, and cities have changed the slope of the ground, causing flooding into fields, neighbors' yards, neighbors' homes. So take that into consideration when you vote on this. About if we don't have this answer right here, we're setting up, potential flooding for the next door neighbor that's here. 1 inch, 18,000 gallons. That happens about 7 times a year. 2.5 inches happens about every other year. No, about once a year rather. I'm sorry. A year ago we just had a 2.5 inch rain, so it does happen. It seems to be happening more frequently. And also this project, we've had the Four Corners apartments several years ago. I don't think that ever made it to City Council. There was that downtown project on Cook and 3rd. I think that was in Ward 2. I'm sure the Ward 2 person could probably speak to that more than I could on the opposition that faced, and that never made it to City Council. I don't want to see this corner being the guinea pig for a project like this. I was at a city council meeting, a different city one time, and the developer was, hey, we want to put this so we look urban. Well, we're not urban, we're suburbia. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? Last chance. All right. Thank you all for your comments. I know it's difficult to get up here and speak, so we appreciate you relaying your feedback in addition to all the material that we have up here. I guess, why don't we do this? I assume the council has a lot of comments or a lot of questions perhaps for the developer or for city staff, so maybe we can, at this next phase, iron out and separate some fact for fiction and get some clarification. So, council, any questions for the developer, for city staff? Councilmember Jones.
Mr. Watson, it's 24,416 gallons, by the way. And that would be going, my question is to Mr. Kauppi and or Ms. Talon because of the sensitive nature. So two-pronged question. When the development was originally designed, does the stormwater dump into Pepper Tree Pond right now?
Mayor, members of the council, to Councilmember Jones's question, the entire current site does drain into either Jansen Avenue, the majority of it into County Road E into the storm sewer, and goes to Pepper Tree Pond. As far as Mr. Watson's question, the existing site provides no runoff control with a similar impervious surface. So the proposed condition only helps that situation because there is retention provided in that basin. Currently, there is no retention. It flows directly offsite into either County Road E or Jansen Avenue, directly into Pepper Tree Pond without any treatment or rate control.
So part B of that question, was any design done as far as 100-year storms?
Mayor, members of the council, yes. As my presentation had noted, that we looked at the 210 and 100-year events. So that pond or that retention basin was designed to retain those and discharge them at, again, lower rates than the current condition.
Last part of the question, because Mr. Watson is on to something, because it is happening more frequently. I know sitting on the Vlamo board, we are starting to look at 500-year storms as the norm, not 100-year storms. Was that taken, and I'm not asked the question, sorry, was that taken into consideration at all?
Mayor, members of the council, currently that is not again, different watershed districts, agencies are looking at that. It is not a recognized engineering standard at this point as far as the PCA goes or different regulating agencies. One thing to note, we do look at that stone melt event where we look at frozen ground, the water running off into that basin. So it's kind of in between. As far as additional protections, we look at those emergency overflows off the site. So if the basin were to fill up in a bigger event, where does it go so that it does not impact any surrounding properties? It follows proper drainage patterns to where the ultimate discharge location is, in this case, Pepper Tree Pond.
So last part of the question, 0.67 acres. What's the average residential lot in this area as far as acreage? And I'm going to guess it's 0.25-ish.
I'll turn that over to Mr. Lindahl.
Mayor, members of the council, the average lot in this neighborhood is around 10,000 square feet, which would be, as you say, about a quarter of an acre, or about 0.2.
Is there any reason that any more runoff would be derived from this 0.67 acres? Does water magically, more water appear on this 0.67 acres than on anywhere else in the neighborhood?
So if we look at, again, going back to maybe the beginning of my presentation, this we're not really comparing apples to apples. The neighborhood in question was not designed with any stormwater controls at all, other than it all drains directly to Pepper Tree Pond unregulated. This development would be under current condition or under current standards. It would limit and regulate that rate of flow off of the site. So it's not just every square inch of impervious just flowing directly into a storm sewer system to that pond. It's slowed down, regulated, treated before it gets there.
Thank you, Mr. Kauppi. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Talon.
Good. I'm sorry. Can I just pick up where he left off? Sorry, Katie.
That's exactly what I wanted to do.
Okay, you go then.
If we built a house on that lot, one single-family house, would they have to do stormwater retention or anything on it if somebody came in and we made that a residential lot?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to look at Ms. Talon, but our current standards, I believe, would not require any stormwater management.
So if that became... Yes, I can. Gosh, sorry, I hate being on a mic. My question was, if this was just a single lot with a single-family house on it, would there be anything, would we have done anything with stormwater retention? Would we have made this lot any better?
With I'll call it a single-family residential lot, it would likely not trigger stormwater management requirements.
So the conditions would stay as existing and they would not be improved?
Correct.
Councilmember Walsh.
Okay, thanks. So, Mr. Mayor, just Al asked a question about water flow to the north to County Road E, and so maybe we could clarify that because I had a similar question. So my understanding would be this would be happening underground, not necessarily the surface water necessarily, but there's stormwater pipes and it would connect up and then come back down into the pond. Maybe we can answer Al's question about just how water flows north to County Road E.
All right, so Mr. Lindahl brought up the slide from my stormwater presentation. So again, the dark rectangular square in the upper left-hand corner shows the site in question. You can see the arrows along County Road E. The majority of that site flows north to County Road E, both existing and proposed conditions, into a pipe system directly into Pepper Tree Pond. Small area adjacent to Jansen flows to the, basically if you look at the kind of the middle of the screen there, it flows to that same point, just a little bit downstream in that pipe system. So again, under the proposed conditions, that biofiltration basin intercepts some of that water, treats it before it gets into that storm sewer system, discharging in a Pepper Tree Pond.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, two other questions that came up from the audience that I think we could get an answer to. Chris asked about this least busy road concept. Is that something we should be concerned about? I've never heard that, I don't think. So what's the clarity on, traffic entering and exiting least busy road?
Mayor, members of the council, as far as this condition goes, from an engineering standpoint, traffic engineering standpoint, exiting onto that less busy road, again, this is residential. From a traffic volume standpoint, overall, very small amount overall. Bel Air Avenue is a much higher volume roadway, and I'm not going to remember the exact numbers. It's in excess of 5,000 vehicles per day, versus you look at a roadway like Jansen, you're probably less than 1,000 vehicles per day.